there's a breakup, it's exceedingly hard, especially if the person is young. Why? Because the relationship represents the whole future. They know there are other people, but it sort of feels like the whole world is shutting down.
Dr. Hubberman's insight into the pain of ending a relationship in youth is a powerful reminder that grief can be overwhelming, but it doesn't define our future. In this video, you're going to discover how to move through this difficult time with resilience and grace. By learning the effective ways to cope with your loss, you can overcome the feeling of a lost future and pave the way for a brighter tomorrow.
People use a number of strategies. They use distraction. People will, try and self-soothe with alcohol or try and self-soothe with multiple new partners or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't work. There's the so-called secure attached style. This typically emerges in childhood when there's a very predictable caregiver-caree relationship between child and most often mother, but it can be father too or other caregiver. Just so happens that the classic experiments were done on mothers because this was in the 1970s and there weren't as many reverse role, homes, etc. So that's one style of attachment. The parent leaves, the child gets a little distraught, but then can distract itself doing other things or just simply do other things because they have a high degree of intrinsic knowledge, not the thought, but intrinsic calm. The autonomic nervous system doesn't feel any need to ramp up because the mom returns. Then there's the so-called insecure attachment styles, and there are a bunch of different ones, but those are the ones where it's really stressful when the parent leaves. It's not clear they're going to come back, and when they come back, it's not clear that they're going to reestablish the bond, the child will feel supported, etc. Here's what's fascinating. Those same neural circuits are repurposed for romantic attachment in adult life. The same circuits, which shouldn't surprise us. I mean, why would the brain throw away valuable circuitry? But this whole Freudian notion that, childhood attachment styles map onto adult attachment styles, that's real. That's physiological.
The impact of childhood relationships on adult romance is a fascinating topic that Dr. Hubberman has studied extensively. By understanding how early experiences shape our approach to love, we can better navigate the ups and downs of adult relationships. In this video, you'll discover how psychological feedback can help you avoid repeating past mistakes and emerge stronger after a breakup. Dr. Hubberman's insights are sure to inspire and empower you on your journey towards a healthy, fulfilling relationship. I believe in you.
It's not one for one in the sense that, let's say you had a secure attachment to your father. Let's say it's a young girl, and as a baby and a young child, she had a secure attachment to her father and an insecure attachment to her mother. In adulthood, and let's say she's heterosexual, so in adulthood, she prefers men as romantic partners. This girl grows up, and you might say, well, she had a good relationship to her dad, so she's going to have a good secure attachment style in her adult heterosexual relationships. Often it's not the case. They will transplant or superimpose the insecure attachment style to the mother onto male relationships, but have great relationships to female friends, for instance. So all of that is in us. And then you were talking about breakups, and the way that grief works in the brain and nervous system is that there are three sort of factors that are mapped in our consciousness and our subconscious. And these are space, time, and this notion of closeness, which is attachment. Space and time is very simple. It's where is the person that I love and when will I see them next? Right? I mean, if you have a relative that lives overseas and you know they're alive, you're not going to grieve them. You might really miss them, but you're not going to grieve them the same way you would if suddenly you get the note, unfortunately, that they passed away. And then attachment is how close you are to them, like how critically you rely on them for internal control and support. And that doesn't mean they have to be an immediate caregiver. It could just be like a really good friend. You call them mates over in the UK, right? Like a really good friend that just your knowledge of him just makes you feel good. You feel better in the world. As a guy who mostly grew up with kind of a big pack of male friends, I mean, I feel strongest and happiest and most secure in life when I see something about one of my friends doing well in life. It just makes me feel good. If one of them dies, and unfortunately I'm getting to the age where a number of them have died, then you feel like all of a sudden like, goodness, like there's a loss internally, right? Okay, that's all sort of obvious, but what's interesting is that the grief process itself is about restructuring this map. Think of it like a tripod. It's got three pieces: space, time, and closeness. When someone dies, it's very confusing for the brain because where are they in space? Well, the body is put someplace. Maybe it's cremated, maybe it's not. We have notions of a spirit, and that depends on one's orientation, a soul or a spirit, okay? Or if you don't, then where do they go, right? And then time, when will you see them again? The never. You'll never see them again. And the closeness component remains. And so there's an untethering of this map. And so there's been brain imaging studies, beautiful work by Mary Frances O'Connor at University of Arizona, showing that if you look in the brain in people that are in grief from loss of a really strong attachment, the state of brain and body that gets flipped on is a motivational state. It's exactly the same circuitry in the brain that one sees active if someone very hungry is put just outside the wall of some delicious food, or if an animal that really wants to mate, I guess mate, with animals you call it copulate. They really want to copulate with another animal, is put just beyond the wall of that animal, but they can smell them. I mean, these are highly motivated, desiring states. So grief is a motivated state to bridge the distance in time and space, and yet it's impossible. And so the process of grief is a gradual waning of that motivation and a gradual shift of the memory of the person into some concept, whether or not it's a soul, whether or not it's just the past, whether or not it's their energy. Again, it depends on what the forebrain of that particular person believes, shifts that concept of that person into a place where the brain is comfortable. There's no more autonomic arousal. There's no motivation. When there's a breakup, it's exceedingly hard, especially if the person is young. If you look at suicides after breakups, those are far more common in younger people than they are in older people. Why? Because the relationship represents the whole future. They have no concept that they know there are other people, but it sort of feels like the whole world is shutting down. So in breakups, what's happened is the person is no longer available in time and space. This is why when someone breaks up, you literally have to let them go, right? Constant pursuing of them is out of context, is not healthy. They have a name for that. It's called a stalker. Don't do it. But it's almost as if the brain has to think that the person is gone in time and space. And this has become much harder with social media, right? Because people can check up on people, they can hear from people. In the old days, like when I was growing up, you just took the phone off the hook, or you diverted your attention. Now we are constantly renewing that the person is still there. And so love and the loss of love and the death grief are virtually identical. It's that motivational state. And this is why it's so hard to not reach out to somebody that you really miss and want back. How comfortable one is feeling their feelings, is male or female, is going to strongly dictate how quickly one moves through grief. This is the same thing as trauma. The more willing someone is to feel the full depth and intensity of the feelings that they associate with that trauma, the more quickly they're going to move through the trauma. People use a number of strategies. They use distraction. They use states like, they sublimate to things like anger and avoidance of various kinds in order to not feel the traumatic feelings or not feel the breakup. People will, try and self-soothe with alcohol, or try and self-soothe with multiple new partners, or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't work. It just extends it, because this map of space, time, and closeness needs to be fractured. And the only way to do that is for the brain to have to confront the reality, which is that whether by death or by breakup, they are no longer available. It's like the food on the other side of that wall is gone. It's just not there anymore. Or that the food that was accessible, now there's a wall in between, and you will not get through it. And you can see this actually in animal studies that are kind of hard. They're actually very hard to watch. You'll see the animal perseverate, literally damage its own body trying to get through a barrier to something it's highly motivated to see. People do that post-breakup. They usually do that by talking to everybody about the breakup, which is its own form of perseverating on the motivation. What did I do? What did I do wrong? This and that. And some of that analysis is healthy, some of it's not. Now, why would one group be more, let's just say, effective at dealing with breakups? It's probably the ability to really feel the full intensity of how sad it is and be able to confront that. And here I'm a male. I will tell you is that I think from a very early age, there's an ability that, at least I'm sure it transcends to women too, or extends to women too, but learning to pack down feelings, right? And so what are we really talking about when we're talking about pack down feelings? I'm not a psychologist, but what we learn is top-down control, forebrain to autonomic control. Grief is an autonomic state. We say it has valence, it has negative valence, but it's high levels of autonomic arousal with a negative connotation because you can be high levels of autonomic arousal with happiness, right? You can be very alert and aroused and happy, very alert and aroused and sad. It's very alert and aroused and sad, and yet we learn it's very alert and aroused and sad, and yet we learn how to tamp that down. What is tamping down? It's reducing our heart rate. It's going to work each day, being a functional human being. There's a lot of that, rather than allowing ourselves to, sob uncontrollably into a pillow. So I think the better that we can lean into the emotional states that we fear the most, but in a controlled way where we're not harming ourselves or other people, the better. The more that we try and avoid that, and we try and sublimate or just, and I've done this, so I'm speaking from experience, I would use the anger or the sadness from an experience to just work 10 times longer, 10 times harder, to just get that much more focus. You're taking that autonomic arousal, that narrow aperture and that energy, and you're putting it onto something that moves your life forward. So in some cases that's good because you still need to function. It gave me the illusion that I was working through something because you get all the accoutrements and rewards of hard work, but what you don't do is remap that space-time closeness map. And then you find, I guarantee, you find yourself 5 or 10 years later wondering why you're so exhausted or why certain things in life aren't going well. And it's because, when they say you haven't dealt with the loss, you never actually allowed yourself to feel the feelings. But once you do, it's like a valve, it releases. There are times in our life where we feel compelled to take on certain challenges for whatever reason. There's a phrase that doesn't exist in the scientific literature, but it captures two components of physiology that are absolutely factual. That human beings resonate with these extreme states. There aren't many great albums written about a good day walking on a Sunday in the park. Like, it's kind of boring. I mean, there's the beautiful painting Sunday in the Park with George, but I'll be honest, it's beautiful, but it's also kind of boring. You can look at the details of it for a while. People like intensity. The Scream is, people can look at that for a long time, and it speaks to the psychosis of the artist, etc. People don't generally bond through passive, relaxed states unless they've also been through a lot together.